Hello BookTube, I'm Scott.
I'm Nelle.
We are Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot, and we have another tag video. This is our 4th video in a row in a bulk faction. I'd just like to say, just because it's featured in the last few, this coffee is still horrible.
Stop drinking it.
Why do I do this?
Because you think it's funny. I've just realised that you think it's funny.
This is the Mookse and the Gripes bucket list book tag. It was created by SHAWN the Book Maniac, and it's really simple. You need to just name some books that are on your bucket list.
Shit to read before I die.
We were tagged by SHAWN in his original video. SHAWN is a BookTube icon. He is a BookTube staple. If you are not subscribed to and watching SHAWN, I'm disappointed in you. When I first started to do this, I thought, 10? I'm going to limit it to 10, and there are just so many books that I did not include on this.
Yeah.
Books that I'm aware that I'm holding off on that I want to get to. So maybe I have to...
I definitely look at this stack and I'm like, what prevents me from just making this my, reading list for the next few months?
Yeah, should I just finish these 10 books by the end of the year?
But then I also see what else I've got to read.
Yeah.
I see how easy it is to get distracted. There's so many good books.
Yeah, this is the ultimate problem with books, isn't it?
I think it's the ultimate reader's dilemma. We're not immortal. We can't possibly read them all. How do you narrow it down?
I think with everything that goes on BookTube, you can end up not picking the books that you want to read.
Yeah, I do think that sometimes readathons and those things can dictate a little bit too hard.
But let's be fair, we all participate in the readathons because we want to, not because...
Yeah, no.
We're prioritising one set of reading over another set of reading just because our friends are doing it and it sounds like fun.
Yeah.
But it's always to read the same books as somebody,
It's nice to have someone to talk to.
Oh my god. I wonder if we can edit the snoring out in the sound app.
I reckon you won't even be able to hear it. The other times I'm like, oh my god, he's snoring, and I have to cut out that comment.
Really?
Yeah, because he's not always picked up, although we do have a good microphone.
We do. I reckon we need to get him a CPAP machine. He's also not often sleeping behind you.
Oh yeah, that's true.
He's normally the other side of the mic.
Let's take people.
Do you know whose list this is the person I would most like to see do this. I'd like to see Jen at Remembered Reads do this. She reads
some weird ass fucking shit.
You can have a conversation with Jen about off the beaten path literature, and you can say, this is really off the beaten path, and Jen will look at you like, what?
It's barely dipping your toe in.
Yeah, she's really out there, and I really appreciate her taste, so I'd like to hear what she has to say.
I want to tag Steph.
From Time to Read. Yeah, Stephanie from Time to Read.
Stephanie from Time to Read. And I want to tag Kat from Biblio Obscura.
I really want to hear what Olivia has to say about this too.
Yeah. Especially because she's young. I feel like the concept of a bucket list for someone her age is ephemeral.
Oh, I suspect she has one.
Yeah.
I suspect she has one, and she will do an excellent version of this tag if she decides to do it.
Yeah.
So we've tagged some kick-ass booktubers.
Yeah.
I hope they do it.
This is a really hard question because my initial response is everything on my friggin' TBR and a bunch more.
Yes.
But I definitely think that there's ones that you'll be really disappointed if you don't get to. Not that you'll know because you'll be dead, but...
Kicking myself in the afterlife when I go to heaven and they don't have books for me to read.
Oh my god.
I mean, what the fuck? It's because I'm going to hell.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Alright.
I think the point is, though, that this is not necessarily the next 10 books you're going to read, but they're books that you might need to, have as a bit of a destination.
I think these are important books that you think will be important to you. I've made a stack, so these are probably not... If I was going to write my bucket list in priority order, this might not be the first 10, but these are definitely on the list. My first on the pile is 3 books that we're going to pretend are one.
Yeah, because book series should be illegal.
And that's the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jefferson. She won the Hugo, I think it was, 3 years in a row for each of these. And then got a whole bunch of death threats from stupid people.
Yeah, because how dare a black woman win the Hugo Awards
3 times in a row? Champion. I like a bit of sci-fi. I like a bit of fantasy. I probably didn't read it the instant I got it because it is a trilogy, and I think that I will probably read it end to end. So I'm treating it like a massive chunker.
Well, I didn't know that it was 3 Hugo Awards. I thought that she won 1 Hugo Award. That she won 3 Hugo. That she did the Hilary Mantel, but Hilary Mantel failed at.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I'm very interested in that now, and not really my genre, but always up for a good book no matter what the genre is.
Yes, and I think you can be assured of the quality of this for this genre. Like, I wouldn't necessarily want to read the lower end of quality in fiction and science fiction and fantasy.
I think that's true for any genre, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your first?
Well, my first one, I want to say the Bible, but I actually just mean religious texts. I think that they're fascinating because of what they tell us about humanity at a certain time.
But you're going to die of boredom. The read is not a fun one.
There are a lot of references to the Bible that I do get in literature, but I've never read the Bible. I've just picked it up by osmosis. But I also would like to include the Torah and the Quran and what's the Indian poem called, the Ramayana?
I read the New and the Old Testament. Sort of early university for like similar sort of logic, but then I read it was a book. I can't remember what it was called.
The Abridged Bible.
No, it was like an analysis of religious references throughout historical literature, and so it gave you an overview of like really common references from all of the big religious texts. And it did it by literary era. So, like, the Victorians often referred to this, and this, and etc., etc. And I felt that, while not quite as good as having read all the texts, was enough. So I think if you find a good, like, non-fiction discussion of those things, that's almost as good as reading the whole thing.
I'd still like to read
the whole thing. List.
I'd still like to read the whole thing. I think a lot of people, like a lot of Christians, will assume that I will have some sort of spiritual awakening, which I think is a naive thing to think that anybody will get to the age of life I am in and be converted by reading the Bible. But I would like to see what that is all about.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm the naive one, and maybe I will be
have one less wife.
A born again,
risking
my marriage. And I feel like we may be going to hell.
Yeah, small amount of hell.
I feel like we've somehow been a bit not very nice towards.
Yeah, we probably.
So I don't mean that. If you are a Christian, please don't unsubscribe and get angry from us. You do you, we'll do us.
This is book number 2 for me. Emile Zola, Journal. And that's probably one of the reasons why. I think when your partner loves a book, it's difficult to not put it high on the list. But also, I'm a giant communist.
Yeah, there's so many reasons to read this book that you don't know about yet.
Yeah.
Because
I haven't read it yet, and I get to discover them all on my little lonesome, and you don't get to spoil them for me.
I do look forward to you reading that one, because that is a safe Nelle lie. The Master and Margarita. I have read an abridged version of this, and I really, really liked it. But, you know when you think you're reading the full thing, and then a few years later you're like, hang on a second.
That only went for 20 pages. Yes.
And I'm not sure, this is definitely the sort of book that abridging may make it awesome. Mm-hmm. But this book, it's like a retelling of the Faustian sort of pack. Mm-hmm. But it involves a cat, it involves burning of manuscripts, it is critical of Russia at the time, it's funny as fuck. It is one of these books that I don't think you can ever walk away from this book and going, I understood what he was talking about. But I sure as hell was entertained when I read the abridged version, and I want to read the full thing because...
This is a bit of a stand-in for, the Margaret Atwood backlist. And there are a couple of authors missing from this stack who I would also include in that sort of category where I would like to read their backlist before I kick the bucket. But Margaret Atwood was probably one of the... I certainly identified this quite early on that I wanted to read everything by Margaret Atwood. So The Heart Goes Last is sort of the next one on the list for me, I think.
I have something similar in this sort of read an author's backlist in my version. I would like to read every single Jeeves and Worcester novel.
Such a dog.
There are 2 types of people in this world. People who love Jeeves and Worcester and people who have not yet read Jeeves and Worcester. There is something just so charming and so funny about P.G. Wodehouse. He's not a hard author to read, but he's a very talented sentence constructor. The sort of talent that you don't generally see write this style of book. He has that sort of same wit that people like Austen and Eliot have, but he puts so many more jokes in. That sort of says the opposite of what they're meaning, but actually says it pretty straight, that sort of style. And Jeeves and Worcester is his masterpiece series that everybody talks about. And to be honest, anything by P.G. Wodehouse has that. Some authors that, it might not be a 5-star book, but you know that you're going to read it and you're going to enjoy it and you're going to like spending time in the novel. And you just know that for sure. Wodehouse is one of them.
Yeah. This is definitely reinforced by my recent reading of
No one is talking about this.
No one is talking about this, but I want to read Patricia Lockwood's Police Daddy. After reading No One Is Talking About This, I just... The woman can write a thing. The synopsis of this had me wanting to read it anyway. I suspect that this will be a much higher quality book than I thought it was going to be when I first bought it. Now it's sort of one of those books that I expect to love.
Well, the next book I want to mention is The Red Sphinx by Alexander Dumas. Now, this is the sequel to The Three Musketeers. Mm-hmm. I think a few people might say, wait, doesn't The Three Musketeers have a sequel? Isn't it 10 years after or 20 years later? I forget.
Whatever it's called.
There's a 20 years later and a 10 years after, and I forget the order of them because it's obvious, isn't it?
Yeah.
The one that's not part of the Viscount de Bragelonne series anyway. So that is the sequel to The Three Musketeers, but that follows D'Artagnan and Aramis and all of those toxic men. This just goes, this is the court in France after the Milady and the D'Artagnan thing is resolved. And we're going to continue with what's going on. We're going to continue with the Cardinal and the Kings and all of this sort of stuff.
That's the other half of the story.
Yeah, so it's like, really, what they've had is they've had two spin-offs. And one have followed the setting and one has followed the characters. I was actually going to start this book the other week, and I just decided to not, because I think I want to reread The Musketeers, which goes from me reading a slabby Dumas book to reading two slabby Dumas books. And I really like Dumas. He's very consumable, one of the most consumable writers of his time, but there is a limit to...
How many slabs you can fit in your fridge?
The more books I consume, the less tolerance I have for a long book. What's going on? Like, I can read 20 books in a month, and I will not. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Speaking of no tolerance for big books.
Oh, and French.
It was on my goals list for 2020 to finish this, and it didn't happen. I have successfully, despite being in like a very musical theatre-oriented family, I have successfully avoided plays, movies, references, anyone telling me the end or the beginning or the middle. I know nothing about The Miserables. I need to read it. So this is definitely a project book for me. But it's massive.
A lot of fans of that.
1,263 pages. Like, come on.
Charlotte at Coney Reads loves that one. It's a good book.
I feel like I need to take a month off work to just like
I know what you mean. Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Udopal. This is like a gothic book, like written in a similar time as Jane Austen.
Yeah.
And it just seems like such a pre-fantasy sort of dystopian-esque weird novel that I mean I have not read it, so if you have read it and I've got that all wrong. But it's a big book that I had been meaning to read for a long, long time and have put off because it's big essentially.
Yeah.
Speaking of, this is on both of our lists.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, this is the book for me. This is the number one book for me.
I've read Vikram Seth before. I've read An Equal Music, and his writing is just... It's really good. And this gets rave reviews despite being that. Like, it's almost as...
Like, it's actually longer than Les Mis.
Yeah.
Like, Les Mis is the longest book I've ever read, and it's actually longer than Les Mis.
It's like 1,500 pages. Like, that's a project. It's a must.
It's a must?
Why do you want to read it?
Well, I have a really petty, stupid reason for wanting to read it, and I have... completely opposite reason for wanting to read it.
Yeah, okay.
So do we want the petty stupid reason?
Yeah.
So there's a list that goes around on Facebook. The BBC believes you've only read 6 of these books.
Yeah.
And I've read 96 of these books.
And that's one of the last 4.
And that's one of the last 4. Swallows and Amazons, The Bible, Code are the other 3.
Your time to waste as you will. What's the
I've
other
found
reason?
some very good reasons. Any book that fat, that old, that people still talk about has to be good. I have found that India is one of the regions of the world that I really connect to their style of literature. And I know Vikram Seth is...
British-ish?
Yeah, he's... I want to say... What's it? Has dual nationality.
Yeah.
I quite like British books as well. So
yeah.
It's one of those books. You don't write a book that long and then have your publisher go, yeah, I agree, it needs to be 1,500. It needs to be a weapon in case you are mugged. Right?
Yeah.
And publish it, and then have it last for 20 years without it not being, like...
Yeah, it has to be.
It has to be good.
Angela Davis, Women, Race and Class, I just feel like as a human feminist, should read this by now. This is one of the few times I say I'm a little bit... Actually, I feel like there's a bit of a gap in my reading, like, the historical or the older feminist works that are a bit theoretical. I feel like there's a bit of gap in my reading there, and this is definitely very high on filling that gap.
I'm going to pick another ridiculously old book, and I'm going to pick the Decameron.
Yes,
So the Decameron is essentially the Italian version of the Arabian Nights. It is, it may be the Italian version of the Canterbury Tales. It is 10 people telling 10 short stories to each other. It's quite long because there's 100 short stories in it. But it was written in the 1500s. It's just one of these classics that...
Built on oral history?
I think somebody wrote it. I don't know whether it has been... like Shakespeare wrote a lot on oral history, didn't he? And...
there's lots of fairy stories and stuff that sort of collected oral histories.
Yeah, I'm just like, of that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an autobiography. Assata Shakur is a Black Panther, was a Black Panther. At some point has escaped from prison. From prison, she's a revolutionary figure. She is one of those figures that I think should be taught about in sort of like mainstream education so that we can learn about how our history treats actual people. And sadly our education system doesn't work like that. So this is just one of those things that I think of a little bit as kind of essential reading that I'm catching up.
Even taking out all the race and the gender and everything that's going on in there, history still only wants to write about the winners. They don't want to write about the losers. You want to glorify
all the grey areas, do you know what I mean? Like,
why are we learning history to talk about powerful men, or are we learning history to learn about how shit humans are to one another, and like understanding that humans haven't actually changed, our society isn't actually
getting better.
Like, what is so different about a human that lived during the Spanish Inquisition and a human that lives now? Like, have a time machine and you wouldn't know. Oh, well, like accents and stuff. But, well, grab a baby that was born there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I just don't think there's much of a difference, and I think that the way history is taught is yuck.
Yeah, I agree that the way that history is taught is yuck.
Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. I must confess that when I first saw this book existed a long, long time ago, I was like, it's not unusual, you know? Like, no, wrong Tom Jones.
Yeah.
That Tom Jones is not British, they're Welsh.
They are Welsh.
This Tom Jones is very English. Henry Fielding, it is an early classic. It's pre-Dickens, that sort of era classic that is still talked about today. There's not a lot in English literature that's pre-Dickens that is still talked about today that isn't Shakespeare or Austen, really.
Yeah.
And this is one of the few non-Shakespeare, non-Austen, pre-Victorian English classics that I feel like it's one of the most famous ones, and I don't know much about it at all, to be honest, but it'll tell me something about the society as much as it'll tell me about whether the literature is good. I feel like it's got like it's hedging my bets on whether I'll enjoy it.
The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. I feel like Gloria Naylor is one of those authors that will probably very quickly become a I want to read author. But I've not actually read anything by Gloria Naylor yet, and this seems like a good place to start.
The Famished Road by Ben Okri is a winner of a Booker Prize, I believe. A Nigerian classic, 1991 release. I basically am of the opinion that when I think classics, I think of white Europeans, preferably English authors, and that's got to change because I love Nigerian literature, I love Indian literature, I love Korean literature, and the literature there doesn't just suddenly come into being, you know?
No, there are classics in each of those streams.
To not explore those books...
Yeah, you're missing out.
Yeah, like, I will get just as much joy out of that as I will out of reading the Thomas Hardys of the English literature.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Ben Okri, never read him, but Thomas Hardy of Nigerian literature, I believe. It could be a romance. It could be a thriller. Who knows?
See.
We'll find out.
Alright, this is my last one. This is book number 10. And it's Sarah Waters, the Fingersmith. Basically, every time I bring up Sarah Waters, my husband says, you will like Sarah Waters, there is no question.
You will like Sarah Waters, there is no question. I totally, from the description of every book that I have with Sarah Waters' name on it, I totally agree with you. I'm not saying that she will be your favourite author. What I am saying is that it's impossible for you to read her and go, I don't like her.
Yeah.
Got a kind of Natasha Pulley feel, but not as weird and more lesbian.
I mean, sounds great. Like, every time anyone talks about Sarah Waters, I'm like, sounds great. I haven't quite got to it yet, so.
Yeah. All right. My last book is Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose. This is sort of like, I believe it's like a literary mystery novel.
That sounds fun.
Umberto Eco is a Portuguese author. I've not read a lot from Portugal.
Yeah.
Just on my list of books to get to.
So many though.